other thing technologists always love to say is the great thing we will do when we do contracts, technologists, is they'll solve the clarity problem. Every term will be perfectly clear. Because you write those contracts out, and there's all sorts of ambiguity and vagueness, and it's a total mess. But when we've coded all of our contracts, our smart contracts, then we'll have perfect certainty for every single outcome, and that will be great.
E-trial from Cinco. It's fun. Just enter your plea, choose an E-jury, and submit your evidence. Then sit back and watch.
It cost me too much money for defense, so I had to use e-trial, and I was found guilty.
I'm a man who's a judge, and I recommend e-trial.
And the point I want to suggest to you is that often obscurity is a real value. Obscurity is what you want. Because here's a way to see it. So imagine this is a decision tree, and it's really small because I just stole it from the internet. It doesn't have anything to do really with what I'm talking about here. But imagine a really complicated decision tree like this, which is to represent all the possible things that could happen with our deal. So I want to buy the house, but what happens if the house gets hit by a meteor? Or what happens if you go bankrupt? All of these possible outcomes. And in principle, we could say we should be negotiating every one of these blue dots. We should be saying, what happens if this happens? OK, then this is what you get, and this is what I get. What happens if that happens? This is what you get. OK, so imagine this blue dot here has a 0.002% chance of happening. So you know the chance of that happening is practically 0. And so what's the reasonable amount of time you should spend negotiating that term? 0. Right? Especially because if this term is something he's really worked up about, and you could never come to an agreement about that term, it would be ridiculous that the whole contract fall apart because of this 0.002% possibility. So what contracts do all the time is they create these fuzzy or vague or ambiguous places as a gamble. It's like, OK, we'll go forward. We're going to just gamble that this 0.002% outcome won't happen. Most of the time, in fact, you can work out how often it doesn't happen, right? So most of the time, that'll be just fine. And if it turns out to happen, then what we'll do is ask somebody, namely a judge, to figure that term out. We'll say, what should that term be interpreted as? It was ambiguous, so what should the answer be? And the judge will look at it, and the judge will say, well, it's fair that you win.
I'm a man who's a judge.
So the point is, there are many times when you ask the question, should you negotiate a term ex ante? And the answer to that question is no. And in those contexts, an ambiguity is a way to negotiate it ex post, meaning after the fact, ex post, by using the court. So as we think about these digital smart contracts, this is why smart contracts are referred to as dumb contracts. They're smart contracts for the equivalent of dropping a dime in and getting a Dr. Pepper.
When the weather's hot, Dr. Pepper tastes great cold. And when the weather's cold, that's when Dr. Pepper tastes a great hot. Hi, Max.
The sorts of things where the possibilities are really small and narrow, or like my CEO was really excited, is your plane late? Yes, I get $50. No, I don't. Things where it's relatively clear. But there's a really important conceptual question about what happens when we're trying to use them for the kinds of contracts where what we want is ambiguity. Because if the very terms of deployment, the platform, demand specifying all of the outcomes in this tree, then you're basically saying, well, there's a whole bunch of contracts you're just not going to be able to have in this space, because the cost of specifying that tree will be higher than the benefit of those contracts.